Hello everyone, this is History with Hilbert here, and today I want to do a little bit of explaining about some of the symbolism of the Wars of the Roses, because there are a lot of different symbols associated with this conflict, especially with the different houses, some of which are very famous and others of which aren't quite as famous, and there's so many of them I thought I'd make a video dedicated to this topic, because it's actually a very interesting one. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, the most famous ones will obviously be the roses, the ones the wars are named after. And basically, to sum it up, we have a white rose for York, which is also seen on the modern flag of Yorkshire here, the white rose on the blue background. And also in this one, this is actually a rose au soleil, which is a rose with a splendorous sun as a background, and this is actually from a manuscript from Edward IV's reign, who was a Yorkist king, so we know that they used this rose back then to represent the House of York. Now on the other side we have the red rose of Lancaster, and this is also shown on the modern Lancastrian flag, on this one here on a yellow background or a golden background. And this is also seen, and this is not quite as popular as the white rose. With the white rose, we know it definitely was a Yorkist symbol that was used during the Wars of the Roses. With the Lancastrian rose, it's much harder to find evidence for it, and what's likely happened is that it was used, but rarely, and not as much as the white rose of York, but that Henry VII, he started to promote the usage of the red rose and say, oh, it was used in the Wars of the Roses, because remember, he makes the Tudor rose, which is a combination of the two, to symbolise his marriage to Elizabeth of York and the end of the Wars of the Roses with the unification of the two houses. And actually, if you zoom in on this picture here, which was made a period piece of a Battle of the Wars of the Roses, we do see a red rose with a golden outline, because the golden rose or the golden stalk was actually a symbol of Edward III, a Plantagenet king, and from his sons we get the different branches of House of York, House of Lancaster, so they would have used it. This was shown in a battle piece, but less than the white rose of York. Now, and why we call it the Wars of the Roses? Well, there's a scene, a very famous one, in the Shakespeare plays about the Wars of the Roses, and in one of these, this is where they're standing in the garden, and you have the guys on the faction of York who pick the white roses, and then you have the guys on the Lancastrian side picking the red roses, and they're all like, "Ooh, fight me with your flowers," and that's basically how Shakespeare says it happened. That didn't happen. I can say that with a large amount of certainty. That's preposterous. It definitely didn't happen, but these were symbols of the houses, but not as much as is shown in Shakespeare and as is often imagined. So moving on, we also obviously have some heraldry from the period, and heraldry was very important. It's the symbols of the different houses at this period. So for example, you've got the de la Poles, you've got the Nevilles, the Percys, the De Veres, the Tudors, of course, as well, the Plantagenets, the Howards. There are hundreds of these. Every family had one. So you see a lot of this heraldry, and I'll definitely be making some videos about heraldry in general in the future, because I find it very interesting. But just be aware that there are many different heraldries, which you will see in manuscripts from the period, from the Wars of the Roses, and different variations on heraldry as well. So a son might have a few different symbols on their coat of arms than their father, and vice versa, that kind of thing. So now we also have some of these personalised symbols that I mentioned. And this one is actually called the falcon fetterlock. And it's a symbol used by the Yorkists. Now, I think the first guy to use this was Edmund Langley, who was one of the first Dukes of York from the family that would later, produce Edward IV and Richard of York, that family. So it's the first time that's used with him, I believe. And it's called the falcon fetterlock, and actually if you're quite good at English, might know the word fetter, and fetter is another word for chain. And as you can see, it's obviously a falcon, a white falcon. Again, Yorkists, white. If it's white, it's usually a Yorkist symbol, and pretty much all the Yorkist symbols in this video have some connotation with being white. So a falcon fetterlock is basically this falcon inside this golden fetter, which is a chain. Now, one of the symbols of Henry VI, who was a Lancastrian, was an antelope, a fetterlock antelope. So you have an antelope inside this fetterlock. So you see some of the similar designs with different animals, which then represent different houses. And this was a symbol used by Richard of York, so Richard Plantagenet, the father of Richard III and of Edward IV. And this is also a symbol that Edward IV would have used, although many of these people had several different symbols. Now, this is the rose au soleil, and ensoleil is French. A lot of the vocabulary used at this period was French because, you know, the whole chivalry thing, this is just after the 100 Years' War, but there was still a lot of French involved in English medieval terminology. A lot of French, starting to see a bit of German as well in there, and Latin, of course. And the rose ensoleil means the rose in the sun, and basically it's the white rose of York with a background of this blazing sun. And this symbol is very much associated with Edward IV. This is seen on most of his personal livery, and if you remember from the manuscript I showed with the white rose and again with the sun, that was from a manuscript from Edward IV's reign. So this is one of the symbols that's really associated with him and his reign. Now you also have the white boar, and this one's also very famous. This is belonging to Richard III, so when he becomes king in 1483, this symbol becomes very popular, and it's his symbol. He used it before as well, because I think Richard III was Duke of Gloucester before he became king, when he was still serving under Edward IV, and this was his personal symbol. So when you see this giant white bristling boar riding into battle, obviously on the flag, then you know Richard of York is here, which I think is just really cool. And I'll get onto that later. I'll get onto a few flags. Now this is the Tudor Welsh Dragon of Cadwaladr. And Cadwaladr is also a very interesting figure. He's from a completely different period. Cadwaladr is actually from the Dark Ages. I believe he was a Welsh king or a Brythonic king. And I believe he is also the one who fought and killed Oswald, who was a Northumbrian king, who was a great hero of mine. So he's a bit of a villain. But I quite like Cadwaladr as well. He's a very interesting character, and I'll definitely be making a few videos on that. But this goes right the way back to this Dark Ages Welsh king. And this red lion, which was his symbol, goes back to a myth between there being a red lion, a red dragon, between there being a red dragon and a white dragon in a dream, and that the white dragon was the Saxon and the evil, and the red dragon was, the Celts. So this is why the red dragon is now seen as a Welsh symbol. And actually this dragon can be found on the modern day flag of Wales. The red dragon on the flag of Wales is the red dragon of Cadwaladr, and also the red dragon that was used by Henry Tudor, who would become Henry VII. And that's why we see this dragon on, for example, the pound coin. This dragon is present on the English pound coin, or at least some of them. So now we also will have a look at some of the Tudor symbolism. Now I just mentioned that the dragon was on one of the pound coins, but we also have this golden portcullis, and this is the Tudor rose. If you see carefully, it is the Lancastrian rose with a Yorkist rose within, and it represents the unification of the two houses after the Wars of the Roses, when Elizabeth of York marries Henry VII of the House of Lancaster, so it's putting the conflict to an end. And when you put these together, actually, you get some coins. So you can see on the modern English, or British rather, 20p coin, you have this crowned Tudor rose, as you can see there, and again the golden portcullis almost identically on the 1 pence, and I think on the 2 pence as well, actually on the 2 pence. So it's quite interesting how that links to the modern day still. These Wars of the Roses icons are still everywhere. I showed you the flags of York and Lancaster. They're still around, with these symbols dating back to this period. And also in the change we carry around in our pockets, we also have these symbols that go back to this and also back to earlier times. So for example, the Welsh Dragon of Cadwaladr, which is dating back right to the Dark Ages. And I mentioned flags before. Now I love this flag. I would go into battle in full plate armor under this flag. It's just, it's so cool. I just love it. But it's Richard III's. It's the white boar standard. It's often called the bristling boar standard, which I think is just adds to the epicness of this flag. And again, you can see the symbolism. You've got the 4 white roses. You've got Mili Loyauté. Now, this is, I know a little bit of French, and this is actually, it's either older French or it's some sort of older archaic English. I think it's some sort of older French, and I'm not sure exactly what Mili translates to. Now, lit in modern French is something like bed, but I very much doubt it. I think it might be related to something like liege in English. So, my lord, and then loyauté, well, that's going to be loyalty, I assume, but I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that. I'll ask some of my language friends and see what they think. And then obviously you've got the bristling boar, the white boar, which is Richard III's standard, and also the rose ensoleil. So you've got the Yorkist rose again with this burning sword, and then the English St. George's cross in the corner. And also you've got Henry VII's Welsh Dragon standard. So again, you've got the red Welsh Dragon of Cadwaladr there, breathing fire this time, which adds to the effect, and also the English flag. So these two flags were present at the Battle of Bosworth. And I think that these flags are incredibly, they're incredibly evocative of the period. So they appear in lots of artwork. Now, if you look at any painting of the Wars of the Roses, then you see pretty much always one of these flags. And I love these flags. I think these flags were absolutely brilliant. Now, I'm quite a big flags fan, if you couldn't tell, and I will go on about flags. But I just think that they're so... evocative. They really get the imagination going about this period. And it's one of my earliest memories about history as I moved from the south to the north of England. And while we were driving from the south to the north to where I now live in Northumberland, we crossed through Leicestershire, and the Battle of Bosworth is in Leicestershire. And I remember getting out at the Battle of Bosworth, and my dad bought me a little postcard, and on it was this knight in full armour, and I think it was Thomas ap Griffith or something like, or Rhys ap Thomas, I think, actually, and he's a Welsh knight, and he had this this glorious flag in the background as well. And that's just one of these images that stuck with me over the years. So maybe that's why I'm so fascinated and so much enjoy these flags and looking at them and looking at the symbolism behind them. But yeah, they're just really evocative. So this one is as well. This is an imagined picture of King Richard III, and again in the background you can see his white boar standard. And this is the Battle of Bosworth today. They actually have the two flags, the white boar banner of Richard III and the red Welsh dragon banner of Henry VII. And they're quite popular in film as well. So if you look at some of these films, which I have linked where I've got them from in the description, so that, hopefully not infringing anything. But they're really popular and they're very evocative of the series. So this one is, for example, a picture of the Battle of Tewkesbury. Now you can see all of these different ones. So it's not just the kings that had these flags. Also, the lords would have had their own personal standards, which they'd carry into battle with various things, lions, eagles, dragons, griffins. Think the medieval era, before flags got boring and, before they were just rectangles of different colours and that kind of thing. Flags were really cool. They had all sorts of unicorns and dragons, griffins, everything on them. It's great. I should make a video about that. And these ones, again, are different flags. So the top one, for example, is Edward when he was still the Duke of York. And then you can see the falcon fetterlock, again, with the white roses. And then Ich dien, which is German for I serve. And again, you can see this is a German connection. Now, I'm not sure exactly why there is a German connection here. It's possibly through Burgundy, but I believe the Burgundians, because the Yorkists had a connection with the Burgundians. Generally speaking, during the Wars of the Roses, you had York, the House of York, and Burgundy were, they were mates, they were allies, they got along. And then you had the House of Lancaster and France, they got along as well. So, for example, when Henry VII invaded England in the run-up to the Battle of Bosworth, he was aided by the French because there was this old alliance. And the French hated the Burgundians, so it made sense that one faction in England was friends with the Burgundians and the other was friends with the French because they had vested interest to see the other succeed. But anyway, this is then the German on Edward IV's flag, and again you have Richard III's bristling boar banner with the Rose en Soleil, with Mili Loyalty. Again, and I just find this really, really interesting, and I hope I haven't gone onto this too much, but I thought I'd make a video on it because there are so many different symbols to be seen, and it's not just the obvious ones of, the Red Rose of Lancaster, White Rose of York, blah, 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 and, I don't think they would have been that popular. It's not like all the soldiers would have been wearing the respective rose of their colour and screaming, for the White Rose, and blah. I think that's mostly Shakespeare's imagination, although it is a nice one to think that you would have the Wars of the Roses. I mean, it definitely invokes images of a chaotic greenhouse fight with pots flying through the air and smashing. But, it's quite different, the Wars of the Roses. But anyway, I'll stop talking about symbolism and flags now. And I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have any more questions, please do let me know in the description below. And let me know if you've enjoyed this topic. It's been a bit rambly. And I'll be back with some more content. I have some very exciting prehistoric stuff coming incredibly soon to the channel. So if you're one of the people who's waiting for prehistoric stuff, then you won't have much longer to wait. They are coming. They are going to come in hot off the press, I promise you. As well as some more Wars of the Roses stuff and some more Dark Ages stuff as well. So don't worry about that. I've got you covered. Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching. If you're still with us at this point and you haven't dozed off. And I will see you in the next one, hopefully. So, thanks very much. This has been History with Hilbert, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.